He shoved her hard. The tray clattered, a spray of brown liquid and cheap stew staining the concrete floor. A collective, sharp intake of breath filled the cavernous mess hall, a sound quickly suppressed. She landed on one knee, the impact absorbed with a discipline that seemed alien to the graceless fall. For a moment, there was only the low hum of the generators outside the wire and the buzzing of fluorescent lights overhead. The man who had pushed her, a lieutenant barely a year out of his academy, stood over her. His chest was puffed out, his jaw set in a mask of theatrical indignation. He was built like a recruiting poster, broad and tall, his new uniform still stiff with self-importance. "This is the officers' table," he said, his voice a loud, carrying baritone meant for the entire room to hear. He gestured with a thumb toward the long, crowded tables where the enlisted personnel sat. "Your place is over there. Learn it." The woman on the floor did not look at him, or did not. Her gaze was fixed on the spilled food, a meaningless splatter on the gray floor. Her hands, which had caught her fall, were open and relaxed. There was no tremor, no clenching of fists. She was a study in absolute stillness. She wore sterile fatigues, devoid of rank, name, or unit patch. To the lieutenant and to most of the room, she was a ghost, a support clerk or a contractor, someone who did not matter in the rigid hierarchy of a forward combat zone. Her silence stretched, becoming heavier than his shout. It drew the attention of the room more completely than his display of power. The lieutenant's face tightened. Her refusal to cower, to stammer an apology, was an unexpected and infuriating act of defiance. It was a malfunction in the simple transaction of dominance he had initiated. "Did you hear me?" he demanded, his voice rising. From a nearby table, a man watched, his face a granite mask. He was a command master chief, a man who had forgotten more about combat than the lieutenant would ever know. The chief's eyes, the color of a winter sea, were not on the lieutenant. They were locked on the woman. He saw what the lieutenant did not. He saw the economy of her fall, the perfect distribution of weight, a movement designed to protect a weapon that wasn't there. He saw the unnerving calm in her posture, the meditative stillness of a predator resting. He had seen that stillness before, in other places, in other people. It was the rarest and most dangerous quality a warrior could possess. The chief's hand, which had been lifting a cup of coffee, slowly lowered back to the table. A cold knot formed in his gut. He knew this was not an insult to a clerk. This was someone poking a sleeping dragon with a sharp stick, and he knew the lieutenant was too arrogant and too blind to see the fire he was courting. The woman, the operator, finally moved. It was not a scramble. It was a flow. She rose to her feet in a single, fluid motion, her body unfolding with the precision of a complex machine. She did not brush herself off. She did not look at her stained pants. She simply stood, her eyes, a flat, unreadable gray, finally lifting to meet the lieutenant's. He was a foot taller than her and twice her width. It did not matter. The moment her eyes met his, the space between them seemed to warp. The perceived power dynamic inverted with a silent, violent snap. The lieutenant felt a sudden, inexplicable chill, a primal instinct screaming at him from a place his ego could not silence. He saw nothing in her eyes, no anger, no fear, no submission. It was the look of a scientist studying an insect. It was a look of pure, dispassionate analysis. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. In that time, she catalogued every detail. The slight tremor in his hand, the way his pupils dilated, a response to a threat he was only just beginning to comprehend. The carotid artery pulsing in his thick neck. She calculated the force required, the angles of attack, the 3 distinct ways she could end the confrontation before his next breath. The calculations were not a choice. They were an autonomic response, like breathing. Then, she broke eye contact. She turned, not away from him, but past him. She took 1 step, retrieved an unbroken bread roll from her fallen tray, and walked toward the exit. She did not hurry. She did not look back. Her footsteps were silent on the concrete. The mess hall remained quiet, the air thick with unspoken tension. The lieutenant stood alone, his victory suddenly feeling like a profound and public defeat. He had shouted and shoved and performed, and her silence had answered with more force than a physical blow. He let out a short, derisive laugh, a sound that was too loud and too brittle. "Guess she learned her lesson," he announced to the room. No one laughed with him. No one even looked at him. All eyes were on the door through which she had disappeared. The chief slowly picked up his coffee cup again. He took a long, slow sip. He had seen her file once, by accident. A file so heavily redacted, it was mostly black ink. A file that belonged to a ghost, a member of a unit that did not officially exist. A unit tasked with solving problems the rest of the special operations community could not. The lieutenant had not just poked a dragon. He had tried to assert dominance over a force of nature. The chief knew, with the certainty of a man who had survived decades of war, that the universe would soon correct the lieutenant's error. And the correction would not be gentle. The forward operating base was a scar of gravel and steel on an unforgiving landscape. It existed under a sun that baked the very air, turning it into a physical weight. The constant thrum of diesel generators was the base's heartbeat, a sound that vibrated through the soles of your boots and into your bones. It smelled of dust, exhaust fumes, and stale coffee. This was a place on the edge of the known world, a listening post staring into a new kind of darkness. The enemy here was not a simple insurgency. They were a technocracy, phantoms who fought with algorithms and polymorphic signals as much as with explosives. They could cripple a command center with a line of code, turn a billion-dollar drone into a paperweight. This was why she was here. The operator was not a soldier in the conventional sense. She was a weapon system, a unique fusion of human intellect and brutal training. Her presence on the FOB was a secret kept at the highest levels. She existed in the shadows of the base, a consultant with no official footprint, there to observe, to analyze, and, if necessary, to act as a failsafe against a threat no one else understood. Her quietness was not a personality trait. It was a tactical imperative. In her world, noise was a waste of energy. Ego was a liability that got people killed. She had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. Her father had been a legend in the old wars, a pioneer of the same community she now inhabited. He was a man of immense skill and even greater discipline. He had taught her to shoot before she could properly read. He taught her to read terrain like a map, to find silence in the heart of a storm, to control her breathing until her heartbeat was a choice. He did not raise a daughter. He forged an instrument. "Competence is the only currency that matters," he would tell her, his voice a low rumble. "Rank, medals, reputation, they are ghosts, smoke. When the moment comes, all that is stripped away. You are left with what you can do, nothing more." She had watched him live by that code. She had also watched him die by it. It was on a snow-swept ridgeline in a forgotten mountain range, a mission compromised by a commander who valued his own gut feeling over the cold data his specialists provided. Her father had argued for a different approach, a quieter, more patient plan. He was overruled. The commander, a man much like the lieutenant in the mess hall but with more stars on his collar, wanted a decisive cinematic victory. He got a massacre instead. She was a young analyst then, thousands of miles away, listening to the comms feed as it dissolved into static and screams. She heard the commander's panicked, useless orders. She heard the disciplined final report from her father's team sergeant, and then she heard only the wind. That silence had burned away the last of her childhood. It had cauterized her soul. In that moment, she made a vow. She would never be the one screaming into the static. She would be the one who could cut through it. She would become so competent that her presence alone would be the correction. She pushed herself into the most demanding training pipeline in the world, a place where women were not officially permitted. She did not ask for exceptions. She simply outperformed every standard, broke every record, and met every challenge with such overwhelming ability that denying her became more difficult than accepting her. Her instructors, men carved from granite and fury, did not know what to do with her. She did not complain. She did not quit. She did not falter. She simply did the work, her face an unreadable mask, whether she was shivering in the freezing surf or assembling a rifle blindfolded. They tried to break her. They failed. They tried to understand her. They failed at that too. In the end, they could only do one thing: certify her. She became a ghost, a name on a list that was never seen. Her call sign was Nemesis, the problem solver, the final option. She hunted encrypted signals in the deep web, dismantled terror cells with a handful of whispers, and walked unseen through the world's most dangerous places. Her successes were classified. Her failures did not exist. This was the woman the lieutenant had shoved. This was the stillness he had mistaken for weakness. He had no concept of the history, the training, the loss that was coiled behind her calm gray eyes. He saw a small woman in his way. He did not see the pinnacle of a multi-generational effort to create the perfect human weapon. After leaving the mess hall, she found a quiet corner of the base, a space between two large containers that smelled of rust and ozone. She ate the bread roll slowly, methodically. She was not angry. Anger was a chemical reaction, a neurological distraction. She felt a flicker of something else, a cold, professional pity. The lieutenant was a flaw in the system, a bug in the code. He was a variable that increased risk without adding capability. And systems, she knew, had a way of purging their own flaws. She finished the roll, wiped her hands on her pants, and closed her eyes. She slowed her breathing, her heart rate dropping to a resting 50 beats per minute. She did not dwell on the insult. She returned her mind to the problem she was here to solve, the enemy's signal. It was a ghost, a whisper on the spectrum that defied all conventional analysis. She let her mind sink into the data, the patterns, the silent war being fought in the ether all around them, the mess hall, the lieutenant, the spilled stew. They were already gone. They were irrelevant data points. The signal was all that mattered. The crisis came 3 hours later. It did not start with a boom. It started with a sound, a high-frequency tone that was felt more than heard, a piercing vibration in the bones of the skull. It lasted for less than a second. Then, silence. A new kind of silence. The generators sputtered and died. The lights went out. The screens in the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, went black. Every digital clock, every radio, every piece of networked equipment on the entire base went dead. It was a complete and total systems blackout, a digital decapitation. For a few seconds, the only sound was the wind, now audible for the first time. Then, the shouting began. Panic was a contagion, and it spread fast. In the TOC, the lieutenant was at the center of the chaos. He had been overseeing the night watch, a position of minor responsibility that he treated with the gravity of a theater command. "Get the backup generators online," he yelled, his voice tight with a fear he tried to conceal with volume. "They won't start, sir," a sergeant yelled back. "The ignition systems are fried. Switch to battery power. Dead, sir. All of it. Something drained them instantly." The lieutenant stared at the blank central screen, where the drone feeds and satellite maps were supposed to be. It was a black mirror reflecting his own widening eyes. They were blind, deaf, and alone. His training had prepared him for ambushes, for IEDs, for firefights. It had not prepared him for this. This was sorcery. "It's a massive EMP," he declared, grabbing onto the first technical term he could remember. "Standard protocol, hardened defensive positions, all personnel to the perimeter." The chief, who had made his way to the TOC, stood quietly in the corner, watching. He knew it wasn't an EMP. An EMP was a sledgehammer. It was loud, brutish, and indiscriminate. This was a scalpel. This was a targeted attack that didn't just break the equipment, it had infected it. The lieutenant's orders were wrong. Sending everyone to the perimeter was exactly what an enemy would want. It would consolidate the targets and leave the nerve center of the base undefended. But the lieutenant was the ranking officer present. His orders, however flawed, were the ones being followed. Men were scrambling in the sudden darkness, grabbing weapons and running to the walls, their movements clumsy with fear. The base's carefully constructed defenses were dissolving into disorganized panic. The lieutenant was losing control. He could feel it slipping away, and it made him more desperate, more loud. "I want a comms check every 5 minutes. Runners between posts. Now move," he barked. "Runners will be picked off by snipers, sir," the chief said, his voice a low, calm counterpoint to the lieutenant's frantic shouting. "And there's nothing to communicate. We're dark." The lieutenant whirled on him. "I did not ask for your opinion, Chief. I am in command here." "Yes, sir," the chief said, his face impassive, but his eyes said something else. They said, "You're going to get us all killed." It was in that moment of peak chaos that she appeared. The operator stepped into the TOC from the outside darkness. She moved through the panicked men like a stone moving through water, creating no ripples. She carried a single piece of equipment, a ruggedized tablet of her own design, powered by a shielded, isolated battery. It was glowing with lines of cascading code. She did not look at the lieutenant. She did not look at anyone. She walked directly to the dead central command console and knelt. With a small, specialized tool, she pried open a maintenance panel. Inside was a nest of fiber optic cables. "What do you think you're doing?" the lieutenant snapped, striding toward her. "I gave an order to the perimeter." She ignored him. Her fingers moved with surgical precision, unplugging one specific cable from the main hub. She produced a small custom-built interface from her pocket and connected it to the cable, and then to her tablet. The screen of her device flickered, the code changing from green to amber. "That is classified equipment," the lieutenant bellowed, now standing directly over her. He reached down to grab her shoulder. The chief took 2 quick steps forward. "Sir, I would not do that." His voice was still quiet, but it carried a weight that made the lieutenant pause, his hand hovering in the air. The operator still had not acknowledged his presence. She was completely absorbed in the flow of data on her screen. "They're not outside," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the noise of the room like a shard of ice. Everyone stopped. "The attack isn't coming from the perimeter," she continued, her eyes fixed on the tablet. "It's coming from inside." She tapped a command into the screen. A schematic appeared, a blueprint of the base's own power and data network. A single point on the map was pulsing with red light. "They piggybacked a malicious handshake protocol onto the last supply drone's landing telemetry," she stated, not explaining, just reporting. "It wasn't an EMP, it was a logic bomb. It didn't destroy the system, it seized it." She looked up, not at the lieutenant, but at the chief. "They control our power grid, our automated defenses, our water purification. The generators aren't broken. They're locked out by their own control software." The implications sank into the room, a wave of cold dread far worse than the fear of a simple physical assault. They were not just blind. They were hostages inside their own fortress. The lieutenant stared, his mouth slightly agape. His entire worldview, his understanding of warfare, was being dismantled in seconds by a quiet woman with a glowing tablet. That's not possible," he stammered. "The enemy's core signal is broadcasting from here," she said, tapping the pulsing red dot on her map. "Maintenance Sector Gamma. It's a parasitic device drawing power directly from the main conduit." She stood up, her movements efficient and devoid of any wasted energy. "They've established a new network topology. Our systems are now a subnode of their command architecture. They're using our own satellite uplink to route their global traffic." She paused, letting the full weight of the statement land. "We are now a primary command and control hub for the entire enemy network." The room was utterly silent. The men looked from the operator to the lieutenant, and in that moment, the chain of command shattered and reformed. Rank was a ghost. Authority was smoke. All that mattered was competence, and competence had a name. "Get me a direct line comms tech and 2 men you trust," she said to the chief. Her voice was not a request. It was a statement of operational necessity. The chief nodded once, sharply. "I have them." "What are you doing?" the lieutenant demanded, his voice thin and reedy. He was trying to reclaim authority, but he no longer had any. "I am in command. I'm giving the orders." The operator finally turned her head and looked directly at him, the same flat analytical gaze from the mess hall. "Your orders are tactically unsound," she said, the words delivered with the clinical finality of a diagnosis. "You are treating a systemic infection with a tourniquet. You are exacerbating the crisis." She turned back to the chief. "We have a window of approximately 10 minutes before they consolidate their control and purge the system's core memory, including their own entry logs. After that, we will be permanently locked out and they will be invisible." She held up her tablet. "This device is running a counter-algorithm. It's preserving the integrity of the core memory, but the enemy AI is adapting. It's a fight for processing power, a fight I will lose in 9 minutes and 40 seconds. She started walking toward the door. "The tech needs to patch me into the central server mainframe, port 7B. He'll know what that means. Your men will provide security. The device is in a shielded junction box. We have to remove it physically." The chief was already moving, grabbing the arm of a terrified-looking but capable young specialist. "You heard her. Let's go." He pointed at two seasoned sergeants. "You two, with me." They moved without hesitation, falling in behind the operator as if they had been training for this their entire lives. The lieutenant was left standing in the middle of the room, utterly bypassed. The institution, in a moment of crisis, had rerouted itself around his incompetence. He watched them leave, his face a mixture of fury and humiliation. He was a commander with no one to command. The operator moved through the darkened corridors of the base with a predatory grace. The two sergeants, both large, experienced men, struggled to keep up with her silent, rapid pace. They reached Maintenance Sector Gamma, a maze of pipes and conduits deep in the bowels of the base. The air was hot and smelled of charged ozone. "Here," she said, stopping in front of a heavy steel panel marked with high-voltage warnings. The comms tech, a kid named Miller, was breathing heavily, his face pale in the glow of his headlamp. "Port 7B is behind that panel, ma'am," he stammered, "but it's a direct feed from the primary conduit. We touched the wrong thing, and were vaporized." "I am aware," the operator said. She handed him a small, inert plastic card. "This is a frequency-dampening key. When I tell you, insert it into the diagnostic slot. It will disrupt the enemy's control loop for exactly 3.5 seconds. That is your window to open the panel and connect my interface." Miller stared at the card, then at her. 3.5 seconds? "Do not be early, do not be late," she said. "Your timing will determine the success of this operation." She turned to the two sergeants. "The device will have a localized defense system, most likely a high-energy microwave emitter. When the panel opens, it will activate. It will cook you from the inside out in seconds. Stay behind me." They took up positions flanking the doorway, their rifles ready, their faces grim. The operator knelt before the panel, her tablet connected to a coil of cable. She watched the cascading code. "The enemy AI is aware of our presence," she said calmly. "It's attempting to reroute power to this sector to overload the circuits." On her screen, a timer counted down. 3 minutes. "Chief," she said, her voice now coming through his earpiece, the only comms channel she'd been able to salvage. "Status?" "We're in position outside," the chief's voice crackled back. "We have no idea what's waiting for us when the power comes back on." "It won't matter if we fail here," she replied. 1 minute. "Miller, prepare." The young tech positioned the card, his hand shaking. "Steady," she said, her voice dropping, becoming a hypnotic, calming force. "Watch my hand. When it drops, you push." 30 seconds. The code on her screen was a frantic, chaotic waterfall of red. The enemy AI was fighting her, throwing up firewalls, attempting to rewrite the very firmware of her device. It was like wrestling with a digital god. 10 seconds. "Stand by. 5, 4, 3, 2. Her hand dropped. Miller shoved the card home. There was a loud click, and for a breathtaking moment, the oppressive hum of the parasitic network vanished. The panel's electronic lock disengaged. The comms tech yanked the heavy door open. Inside, nestled in a web of cables, was a device the size of a shoebox. It was made of a non-reflective black material and pulsed with a malevolent violet light. The light intensified. A low hum started, rapidly rising in pitch. The microwave emitter. The operator moved before the sound could fully register. She did not try to disable it. She plunged her hand directly into the tangled nest of wires, her fingers finding a specific bundle by touch alone. She yanked. A shower of sparks erupted. The violet light died. The rising hum cut out. Her bare hand had pulled the device's primary power feed. The tech, Miller, stared at her. There was no way she could have known which cable to pull by sight. "Connect me," she ordered, her voice tight with urgency. He fumbled with her interface cable, his fingers clumsy. He plugged it into port 7B. The moment the connection was made, the lights all over the base flickered once. The generators roared to life. The screens in the TOC flashed on, displaying not the familiar tactical maps, but a single line of text on a black screen. Nemesis protocol engaged. System purge initiated. In the maintenance corridor, the operator's fingers flew across her tablet. She was no longer just defending, she was hunting. "The enemy AI is trapped," she announced, her voice cold as the grave. I have it isolated in a virtual partition. It has lost control of the base network. She typed a final complex command string. And I have its physical origin point. A map appeared on her screen. It was a satellite image of a nondescript building in a city thousands of miles away. I am transmitting the targeting data to the global strike network. The asset is live. She paused. Strike authorized. Time to impact, 4 minutes. One of the sergeants let out a low whistle. She'd gone from total system failure to a retaliatory strike on the enemy's central command in under 10 minutes. It was not just a recovery, it was a counterattack of impossible speed and precision. Suddenly, a new alert flashed on her screen. Warning: biosignature detected. Sector Theta. They had a team on the ground, she said, her head snapping up. A recovery team for the device. The blackout was their cover. A burst of suppressed gunfire echoed from down the corridor. The chief's voice came over the comm. Contact! We have contact! Multiple hostiles, Sector Theta! Before the sergeants could react, she was moving. Miller, secure this position, she ordered. No one touches this equipment. She unholstered a pistol from the small of her back, a weapon no one had known she was carrying. She moved toward the sound of the fight, her steps accelerating into a silent, fluid run. She was no longer an analyst. She was an operator. She arrived at Sector Theta to find the chief and his 2 men pinned down behind a stack of crates. Sparks flew as disciplined bursts of enemy fire chewed at their cover. The enemy was good. They moved with professional coordination, advancing down the corridor. The operator took in the entire scene in a fraction of a second. 3 hostiles, standard wedge formation, covering each other's advances. She did not join the chief's position. She climbed. Using a series of pipes and conduits as handholds, she scaled the wall with the speed and silence of a spider. In seconds, she was perched on a narrow beam 20 feet above the corridor floor, directly over the advancing enemy team. They had no idea she was there. They were focused on the threat in front of them. She waited. She let her breathing slow. She watched their movements, predicting their next step. The point man moved past her position, then the second. As the third man, the team leader, passed beneath her, she dropped. She landed on his shoulders, a silent, deadly weight. Her legs wrapped around his neck in a perfect triangle choke. Her pistol was already up, sighted on the second man. 1 shot, a precise double tap to the center of his chest. He crumpled without a sound. The point man whirled around, his rifle coming up. The operator, still on the shoulders of the dying team leader, fired again. Another perfect shot. The entire engagement had lasted less than 3 seconds. She unwrapped her legs and landed softly on the floor as the body of the team leader collapsed. 3 hostiles down, 3 shots fired. The chief and his men stared from behind their cover, their weapons still raised. They had not fired a single round. The fight had been over before they could re-engage. The operator walked over to the body of the team leader. She knelt and retrieved a small data drive from his pocket. She stood up and looked at the chief. Threat neutralized, she said, her voice perfectly even. She holstered her pistol. The moment of brutal, beautiful violence was over. The analyst was back. The debriefing took place 2 hours later in the now fully functional TOC. The air was cool, the screens were bright, and the mood was heavy. The base commander, a full colonel, had been flown in from a regional headquarters. With him was a man who needed no introduction, the admiral. He was the overall commander for the entire theater of operations, a man whose authority was absolute. He was short, bald, and had eyes that seemed to see right through steel. The operator stood at one end of the table. The lieutenant stood at the other. The chief stood against the wall, a silent observer. Lieutenant, the admiral began, his voice quiet but carrying immense power. Give me your report. The lieutenant cleared his throat. He had his confidence back. In his mind, he had already constructed a narrative where he was the hero. Sir, he began, his voice ringing with false modesty, at 2,200 hours, the base was struck by a coordinated attack. I immediately identified it as an advanced electronic warfare event and took command. He proceeded to spin a tale of decisive leadership. He claimed he had anticipated the enemy's strategy, that he had deployed personnel to key sectors to counter their infiltration. He painted the operator as a civilian contractor who had panicked, but then stumbled upon the enemy device by accident. I directed her to interface with the system, he lied, his eyes fixed on the admiral. Using my tactical oversight, we were able to isolate the enemy signal and repel the attack. He even tried to take credit for the physical confrontation. I personally led the team that neutralized the hostile recovery squad, he finished, his chest swelling. The admiral listened without expression. He did not look at the lieutenant. His gaze was on the operator. When the lieutenant was finished, a profound silence filled the room. The admiral let it hang in the air for a long time. Then, he turned his head slightly. "Operator," he said, "your report." She did not offer a narrative. She did not contradict the lieutenant. She placed her tablet on the table and tapped the screen. The main display in the TOC came to life. It showed a complete timeline of the event. It started with audio recordings, the lieutenant's panicked, incorrect orders in the first moments of the attack. The chief's ignored warnings, her own calm technical assessment. Next, it showed system logs. The data proved her analysis of the logic bomb was correct, and that the lieutenant's EMP theory was dangerously wrong. It showed the countdown on her counter algorithm, illustrating the precise window she had to act. Then came the video feed. It was from her own equipment, a micro camera she had activated. It showed, from her perspective, the takedown of the three-man enemy team. It showed her dropping from the ceiling. It showed the 3 precise shots. It showed the chief and his men pinned down, unable to act. The final piece of data was the audio from the mess hall. The recording was crystal clear. The lieutenant's voice, loud and arrogant, "This is the officer's table. Your place is over there." The sound of the tray hitting the floor. His final pathetic boast, "Guess she learned her lesson." The presentation ended. The main screen went black. The operator said nothing. She had not offered a single word of commentary or emotion. She had simply presented the data, cold, hard, irrefutable. The lieutenant was pale, his face slick with sweat. His carefully constructed fiction had been systematically and mercilessly dismantled by pure, unassailable fact. The admiral stared at the blank screen for a full minute. Then he turned his piercing gaze on the lieutenant. "You are a liar," he said, the words falling like stones into a deep well. "Sir, the lieutenant began. "You are a liar," the admiral repeated, cutting him off. "You are a coward, and you are a disgrace to the uniform you wear." He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. His quiet fury was more terrifying than any shout. "In a moment of crisis, your ego was a greater threat to this base than the enemy. Your arrogance blinded you. Your incompetence nearly cost us everything." He gestured to the operator. "This contractor you dismissed is an asset of Tier 1 national importance. Her presence here is classified above your security clearance. It is classified above the colonel's security clearance." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. "You did not command her. You did not direct her. You got in her way, and she saved you and this entire base in spite of your pathetic posturing." The admiral stood up. "Master Chief," he said to the man by the wall. "Sir," the chief responded, "escort this man to the brig. He is to be held on charges of dereliction of duty, cowardice in the face of the enemy, and falsifying an official report. His career is over." The lieutenant looked as if he had been physically struck. "Sir," he whispered. "Get him out of my sight," the admiral commanded. The chief walked over to the lieutenant, his face unreadable. He placed a hand on the young officer's arm. The lieutenant did not resist. He was broken. As the chief led him from the room, the admiral turned to face the operator. He looked at her, then at the colonel, then at the other staff in the room. Then he did something no one had ever seen him do. He squared his shoulders, brought his heels together, and rendered a slow, perfect salute. It was not a salute to a subordinate. It was a salute of profound and absolute respect. A salute from the institution itself to the pure, undeniable power of competence. The operator did not salute back. She was not technically in his chain of command. She simply gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, a nod of acknowledgement. The correction was complete. In the days that followed, a new quiet settled over the base. It was different from the quiet before. The old quiet had been a backdrop of ignorance. The new quiet was a cloak of reverence. The story of what had happened spread not in loud retellings, but in hushed whispers, in exchanged glances. The legend of the quiet woman in the mess hall became a part of the base's DNA. She was seen occasionally walking the perimeter, or sitting alone in the shade of a container, her tablet in her lap. No one approached her, no one disturbed her. Her solitude was now understood not as aloofness, but as focus. The culture of the base began to shift. The loud, boisterous displays of bravado faded. The measure of a soldier became not how loudly he could shout, but how carefully he could listen. Competence, not rank, became the new currency. One evening, the operator was on the roof of the TOC, watching the sunset, painting the dust-filled sky in shades of orange and purple. The chief came up and stood beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. They stood in silence for several minutes. "The Admiral has instituted a new training module," the chief said finally, his voice a low rumble. "Mandatory for all junior officers. It's called the Nemesis Protocol." She did not look at him. "It's a simulation," he continued, "based on the data from your tablet. It puts them in a no-win scenario, a total systems failure. It's designed to teach them one thing." "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely disturbing the air. "Humility," the chief said. "It teaches them that there are threats their training cannot comprehend. It teaches them that the loudest voice in the room is usually the wrong one. It teaches them to identify and listen to the quiet professional." She remained silent, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "The story of what happened here," the chief said. "It will be taught at the academies for the next 50 years. The lieutenant's failure, your success, it's already become a lesson. A lesson about the tactical liability of prejudice. A lesson about how true strength is discipline, not aggression. A lesson forged in a mess hall and paid for in the cold, hard currency of competence." The operator gave another one of her small, almost imperceptible nods. Her work here was done. The system had been purged of its flaw. The balance had been restored. "Your father would be proud," the chief said quietly. For the first time, a flicker of something shifted in her flat gray eyes. It was not sadness, it was not joy. It was a moment of quiet, settled peace. The vow she had made in the silence of a snow-swept mountain range had been honored. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the generators hummed their steady, reassuring rhythm in the cool desert night. The base was safe. The new quiet was secure. And the operator, the hidden master, watched over it all, a silent guardian in a world that was only just beginning to learn her language. The hardest fight was mastering oneself. And in that fight, she was undefeated. Her presence had changed them, not by force, but by example. The quiet professional had proven that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is a mind that refuses to be provoked and a skill set that cannot be denied. The world was full of loud, arrogant men, but she was the silence that answered them, and her answer was final.